Hey guys, Hamsterwheel here with a new video, and today we are once again checking out how the DPS classes are doing in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. Now, last time we checked out how they were doing in early Ulduar, and I think TOC or Phase 3 is pretty close around the corner, so I think it's fun to check out how they're now doing in late Ulduar. We're doing basically the same thing that we did with Naxx, where we checked out early Naxx versus late Naxx, and now we're going to see early Ulduar versus late Ulduar and see if there's anything that has changed when it comes to who's on top. Now we're doing this by checking out the logs of each fight, and we're making sure we have the 99th percentile, basically to rule out any class or player that didn't really know what they're doing, so we don't muddy up the results, because after all we're looking more at class performance instead of player performance. So without further ado, let's go over all the bosses, and at the end I'll show you the overall winners and losers. So without further ado, let's start off with Ignis, the Furnace Master. And this is early Ulduar, and we see the Assassination Rogue on top, Affliction number 2, and Enhancement number 3. And this right here is late Ulduar. Now Assassination Rogue is still on top, but look at number 2, it's Feral Druid. They made a huge jump in terms of DPS because they got a bunch of changes around their class. First they got buffed, then they got nerfed, then they got buffed again, and it was very chaotic for the Feral Druid. But at the end of the day, as we can see in the logs, and as we'll move forward, you'll see it again, that Feral Druids really took a big jump. So they're now number 2. Affliction Warlock still doing quite strong here. Enhancement Shaman 2 and Combat Rogue on number 5. Unfortunately, Retribution Paladins, despite having the buff, they're still really at the bottom. Fury Warriors are not doing too bad. They're kind of in the middle, you can see right here. So they're slowly but surely moving up, but again, still not where people want them to be. But you know, as we all know, Fury or Warriors will probably dominate more in Phase 3 and especially in Phase 4 during ICC. But for now, this is Ignis, the Furnace Master. Okay, then we move on to Razorscale, and this is once again early Ulduar with the Unholy DK on top, Affliction number 2, and Demonology number 3. And here we have Razorscale in late Ulduar, and would you look at that? That's kind of a familiar picture that we saw in Naxxramas with Unholy Death Knights absolutely dominating, and they're doing it here. There's quite a bit of distance between the number 1 and number 2. However, this time it's not the Warlock classes that are number 2 and number 3, it's the Arcane Mage at number 2. They're really strong in this fight, and we have both the Assassination Rogue and Combat Rogue at number 3 and 4. And once again, Feral Druids managed to break the top 5 here, claiming the number 5 spot. Now, for some reason when it comes to XT, there wasn't really any data available when it came to early Ulduar. However, this time there is some data available, so let's check out how they're doing in late Ulduar. Okay, and this is XT at late Ulduar, and XT is more of a cleave fight. You're able to hit multiple targets, which also explains why Fury Warriors here are number 4. Retribution Paladins doing a little bit better, but they're still kind of at the bottom. They're still struggling quite a lot. And once again, you see Feral Druids just, taking names here, number 3. So they're doing really, really well for themselves. And I guess all the crazy change that they had to suffer through, if you will, they really paid off. They're doing much, much better. We still have Unholy DK on top, Assassination Rogue on number 2, and Enhancement Shaman at number 5. So there you go, that is XT in late Ulduar. Okay, then we move on to Assembly of Iron, and this is once again early Ulduar, where we see the Affliction Warlock, Assassination Rogue, and Frost DK at number 1, 2, and 3. We also see the Survival Hunter spec doing not too bad there at number 5. But let's check out late Ulduar. And this is Assembly of Iron late Ulduar, and as you can see, Assassination Rogues and Affliction Warlocks traded place. Assassination Rogue is now the number 1 and Affliction Warlock number 2, and the Assassination Rogue is actually doing quite well here. There's a pretty noticeable jump between number 1 and number 2. And once again, Feral Druids taking the number 3 spot. They're doing really well. Unholy DK number 4, and we have Fire Mage at number 5. Also interesting here is that the Destruction Warlock not doing too bad at all. They're kind of above average here, doing quite well. Then we have the Survival Hunter, and also once again Fury Warrior and Retribution Paladin not doing too shabby. They're kind of around the middle, but compared to some other fights and how they were before, they are doing much better than before. So there you go, that is the Assembly of Iron. Okay, moving on to Kologarn. This is where the Enhancement Shaman, the Unholy DK, and Affliction Warlock really shined in early Ulduar, but let's see what it looks like in late Ulduar. And well, it's quite a different story in late Ulduar, because here we have the Unholy DK on top. Combat Rogue really improved themselves here at number 2. We have Fury Warrior at number 3. So once again, you'll see slowly but surely the Fury Warrior being higher and higher onto these logs here, which is really motivating for the Fury Warriors here, because of course during early Ulduar and of course next Rammus. They weren't doing that well for themselves, so yeah, they can have a lot of fun on Kologarn here. And then we have a big jump between number 3 and number 4. At number 4 we have Affliction Warlock and then Assassination Rogue at number 5. Also what we see here is that the Retribution Paladin not doing too bad, they're kind of around the middle. And surprisingly both Feral and Balanced Druids, both DPS specs, really not doing that well. We saw Feral so far multiple fights being really high into the top 5, yet here they're really struggling to do good DPS compared to the rest of the classes. Alright, we got Auriaya, which is probably a name I butchered, but there you go. And this is early Ulduar. We see Demonology Warlock on number 1 and Survival Hunter, which is usually not very high, not in the top 3. Here it's number 2 and Unholy Decay number 3. However, this is early Ulduar, so let's check out late Ulduar. And once again in late Ulduar we see quite some changes. It is now Unholy Decay that is on top with a pretty noticeable jump between number 1 and number 2. So they're kind of doing a little bit of dominating here. Combat Rogue at number 2, Demonology Warlock still strong here, but not as strong as before. Survival Hunter, again, also not as strong as before, but still at the number 4 spot. And once again, we have the big winner here, Feral Druid, that came all the way from like the middle or the bottom. Once again, doing solid DPS here, taking the number 5 spot for Auriaya. Okay, then we move on to Hodir, which is a fight that's very favorable to mages because you can stack a lot of crit. And we see that back in the logs. This is early Ulduar, and we see Fire Mages absolutely dominating here. There's a huge difference between number 1 and number 2. Number 2 being the Arcane Mage, and number 3 the Balanced Druid. So let's check out late Ulduar. Okay, and here we have late Ulduar, and well, the Fire Mages are still on top by far. It's pretty crazy, with a max DPS recorded of well over 38,000 DPS. That is pretty crazy. Number 2, the Arcane Mage, and number 3 actually being the Elemental Shaman. They're actually doing quite well in this fight as well. Then we have Destruction Warlock also doing really well for this fight, taking the number 4 spot, followed by Affliction Warlock. And despite the fact that Balanced Druids kind of dropped off in this fight, they're still doing a decent job here, being the number 5. Also, Shadow Priests, which are usually more around the middle, maybe above average, they're also poking their head in the top 10, taking the number 6 spot. So yeah, not a whole lot of changes, but still some surprising winners here, including the Elemental Shaman. So that is Hodir late Ulduar. Okay, moving on to Thorim, we have the Affliction Warlock at number 1, Assassination Rogue at number 2, and the Unholy Decay at number 3 in early Ulduar. So let's check out late Ulduar. And in late Ulduar, we still have Unholy Decay, Assassination Rogue, and Affliction Warlock making up the number 1, 2, and 3 spot. However, this time it is the Unholy Decay that takes the first spot with a, pretty noticeable jump again from number 1 to number 2. They are out DPSing every class by a noticeable amount, doing quite well for themselves. And once again, also a big winner here. It's the Feral Druid at number 4. They're having a field day right now in late Ulduar because they're doing quite well for themselves. And we have the Enhancement Shaman taking the number 5 spot. Unfortunately, in this fight, we have Fury Warrior and Retribution Paladins not doing that great. And also this fight shows that once again Survival Hunter is the more favorable spec for now because it's doing much better than Marksmanship Hunter and Beast Mastery, which are way at the bottom. So there you go, that is Thorim late Ulduar. Okay, moving on to Freya. Here we have Freya early Ulduar with Demonology Warlock number 1, Fire Mage number 2, and Frost Death Knight number 3. So let's see how things are in late Ulduar. And this is late Ulduar, and would you look at that. Number 1 spot, Feral Druids. Yeah, you wouldn't have expected to say that in late Ulduar, but once again, the change is doing a lot of good for the Feral Druids right there, taking the number 1 spot. So it's a really good fight for Feral Druids. Barely beating out the Fire Mage, but still they're taking number 1 spot. Fire Mage number 2 being very strong here. Survival Hunter kind of crept up a little bit to the number 3 spot. And then we have Demonology Warlock, Unholy Decay, and Affliction Warlock. So it's also interesting to see that in late Ulduar, the Unholy Decay spec is doing much better than the Frost Decay spec, even though before in early Ulduar, it was the other way around. So there you go, that is Freya late Ulduar. Let's move on to Mimiron, and this is early Ulduar once again with Affliction Warlock number 1, Fire Mage number 2, and then we have both Frost and Unholy taking up the number 3 and 4, with Survival being number 5. So let's check out what it is right now. And this over here is late Ulduar, and we see Affliction Warlock and Fire Mage still being number 2. Unholy Decay is doing quite well. However, it is Fury Warrior that kind of moved up a bunch of spots, and they're doing quite well for themselves at number 5. And it's interesting to see that Arms Warrior was actually doing quite well in this fight in early Order War, yet here they are way down at the bottom, and they're not doing quite well for themselves, unfortunately. And once again, it also shows that the Survival Hunter is the way to go in terms of specs right now to do the max DPS, because both BM and Marksmanship Hunter are not doing too great. Also both Shaman specs, Enhancement Elemental, not the greatest. And also no Feral Druid domination here. No Feral Druid poking their head in the top 5. So there you go, that is Mimiron late Ulduar. Alright, then we have General Vezax. Now I said that General Vezax in my previous video is a fight that's really favored for Elemental Shamans. And it shows here because they are the number 1. However, this is still early Ulduar, so we'll have a look. Arcane Mage, Fire Mage, and Frost Mage, surprisingly, they're making up though 2, 3, 4, and Affliction Warlock number 5. So let's see if the Elemental Shaman still dominates in late Ulduar. And the answer is no. They're still doing quite well, taking the number 5 spot. But Arcane and Fire Mage doing much better. They're taking the number 1 and 2 spot. Affliction Warlock taking number 3. Shadow Priest also doing quite well here with the number 4 spot. And Frost Mage, despite still being the main PvP spec and not really viable when it comes to doing raids, they're actually still doing quite well. They're taking the number 6 spot. And most physical damage specs aren't really doing that well here. It's not really a fight that favors them. As you see a big drop off between Destruction Warlock and then Survival Hunter. So these are all not doing quite well. They're not even in the race when it comes to the rest of the classes. But yeah, Elemental Shaman was really good. They were doing the best when it comes to early Ulduar. But as we see right now, they're still doing quite well, but they dropped off to number 5. So there you go, that is General Vezax in late Ulduar. Okay, then we move on to Yogg-Saron, and this is early Ulduar with the Fire Mage dominating. Then we have Demonology Warlock number 2, Affliction Warlock number 3, and then we have Unholy DK and Frost DK making the number 4 and 5 spot. However, this is early Ulduar, so let's check out what things are right now. And well, things are quite different here. We have the Unholy DK once again being on top. It's a familiar picture if we look at the days of Naxxramas, of course. Fire Mage still doing quite well. They're number 2 instead of number 1. Affliction Warlock doing quite well. And also Survival Hunter doing quite well here as well, taking the number 4 seat. Then followed by Frost Death Knight. Interesting to see here that Destruction, again, mostly meant for PvP, is doing quite well here for themselves. Number 6 spot. We don't see any Feral Druid domination. Fury Warriors are once again kind of around the middle, so they're not doing that great. And unfortunately, again, Retribution Paladins got a buff, but unfortunately they're still kind of way down at the bottom. So yeah, Unholy DK once again on top here at Yogg-Saron. And then the last boss fight, Algalon. In early Ulduar, it was Affliction Warlock being number 1, Unholy DK number 2, Assassination Rogue 3, Survival 4, and Enhancement Shaman number 5. So let's see what it looks like right now. And well, this time around it is the Assassination Rogue that's doing the best. They're taking the number 1 spot. Unholy DK number 2, and as you can see once again we have a big jump from the Feral Druid taking the number 3 spot. Not bad whatsoever. Affliction Warlock number 4, Frost DK number 5, and well, we see a familiar picture here. Out of the all 3 Hunter specs, Survival is doing the best by far. Destruction not doing too bad. And we don't really see any domination here by any of the mage specs, where we see some fights where Fire is doing really well. Unfortunately here they're kind of, above average, but what we do also see here is that Balanced Druids, which are usually kind of around the middle, maybe above average, they are really struggling here to do decent DPS. They're way down at the bottom. And we also see both Fury Warriors and Retribution Paladins not doing too bad. They're doing around the average, below average. But considering how Retribution Paladins are usually always down at the bottom, they're not doing too bad, all things considered. So there you go. Those are all the individual boss fights. So now let's look at the overall damage and see who was the number 1 and number 2, number 3, of course, and more in early Ulduar. And let's see who it is in late Ulduar. Okay, so what we have here is the overall performance of all specs in early Ulduar, and our top 5 was as followed. Number 1 we had Affliction Warlock, number 2 Fire Mage, number 3 Demonology Warlock, and then both Unholy and Frost DK making up the number 4 and 5 spots. So, who is the winner now in late Ulduar? Well, let's find out. And there you go, these are the results right now for late Ulduar. And yeah, Affliction Warlock was number 1 before, and they're still number 1 right now. So there's a bunch of fights where other classes dominated, but overall, looking at all the boss fights, it's Affliction Warlocks that managed to stay number 1. And we've also seen them kind of be really strong in Naxxramas. So far throughout this entire expansion in Classic, Affliction Warlocks are doing really, really well for themselves. It's a good day, good week, or even good couple of months to be an Affliction Warlock right now. Then we have Unholy DK at number 2, Fire Mage at number 3, Demonology Warlock at number 4, and Assassination Rogue at number 5. Now that of course is not the whole story, which is exactly why I made this little thing right here. Here you can see the old position, so this is where the classes were in early Old War, and this is the new position. And over here you can see the change. Obviously if it's red, it's bad. If it's green, that they moved up. And if you just scan here, and I'll go through it with you guys, you can see who the biggest losers and winners were. So of course, like I said, Affliction Warlock stays at the number 1 spot. That's really good from them. And then when we go down here, we see that Frost DK dropped off really hard. They used to be number 5 in early Old War. Now they're number 14. They dropped off 9 positions. So they dropped like a ton of bricks. They went from a really competitive top 5 class to now being kind of below average, which yeah, there you go. That's a big loser. If we go down the chart here, we also see both Enhancement Shaman and Balance Druid, who also gave up a lot of spots here. Enhancement Shamans used to be number 8, now they're 13, and Balance used to be number 9, now they're taking the number 15 spot. As you can see right here, they dropped off pretty hard. So when it comes to Balance Druids, I have a weak spot for them, but yeah, unfortunately they're not doing too great right now in late Old War, so hopefully they're going to do better in TOC. But we also have some clear winners if we look at the green numbers here. First of all, Combat Rogue, they went from number 13 to number 7. That's kind of a big jump. And of course, the biggest winner overall is of course the Feral Druid. They went from number 15 to number 6. That is a giant leap forward for the Druids. It is indeed a huge feral charge forward for the Feral Druids. They moved up a lot of positions, and you know, if you look here, the biggest winner is the Feral Druid and the biggest loser is the Frost DK. We also see a couple of changes here, but most of them are minor. But yeah, again, Feral Druid is obviously the biggest winner here when it comes to moving up. However, of course, when it comes to total damage done in the top, Affliction Warlock still reigns supreme. And there you go, guys. That is a quick overview of how the classes are doing in late Old War compared to early Old War. So I hope you guys liked this video, and I'll be sure to do another comparison when, of course, TOC comes out, and we'll see how classes are doing when we compare late Old War to early TOC. And of course, later down the line, we'll do late TOC, and of course, then early ICC, late ICC, and so forth and so forth. But for now, these are the results. Again, I hope you guys liked the video. As always, I want to thank you for watching. I'm Hamsterwheel, and have a good one.